From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast. All right. We are joined with Helen Atthowe. Helen is the author of The Ecological Farm. It's a title that we carry at the Acres USA bookstore, and I know she's been a long supporter of Acres USA, so I'm excited to talk to Helen today. Helen, welcome to the Acres USA podcast.
Thank you. What an honor to be here.
Yeah. We were just talking about the April edition of the magazine, which is our vegetables and pests portion of our series throughout the year, and Helen has a piece in that. Do you want to talk about it all, what we were just talking about with the April issue?
Well, sure. It was exciting to me because there were so many other fascinating articles in there, including John Kemp's article that I'm going to steal a quote from, I think. And then, as I was telling you, when I was in New Jersey many, many years ago, I did my graduate work there and did some of my first organic farming. I talked to Ann and Eric Nordell, and we talked about all of the kinds of things that we're still talking about. And it was so exciting to see them coming to similar things that I've come to after not talking to them for 20 years. It just made me feel as if we're definitely still trying to figure things out, but gosh, we must be going in the right direction.
Yeah, I think so. And I love the title of your book, The Ecological Farm, as Acres has always used the ecological agriculture, ecological farming as kind of our tagline, as all of these regenerative, sustainable, kind of nice words have gone and come. Ecological agriculture has been our go-to. So we love to have your book and we love what you're working on. But you want to talk about, a little bit of your journey getting to where you are today?
Yes. Well, I started out as an organic farmer, a certified organic farmer. And what I'm now perhaps not properly calling, but I do sometimes use the word, I was a conventional organic producer in that I measured soil and worked at trying to do pest management in ways that I'd learned in graduate school and college when I was studying agriculture. And I really didn't have the courage to step out of that box for many years. But I had, before I went to graduate school, studied agriculture, I had luckily got to study with Masanobu Fukuoka, the OneStar Revolution. And so I had seen that there were other possibilities. And the most exciting one that I always wanted to see if I could bring into commercial organic production was how to maintain a living root in the soil year round. Intuitively, that made sense, seeing Fukuoka do it. But boy, it sure took a long time for me to figure that out. Mainly, I think, because I couldn't figure out how to manage the competition of other living roots besides my crops, and particularly perennial living roots beside my crops. And then, of course, my journey was one of being addicted to nitrogen, to learning that maybe nitrogen isn't the whole story in vegetable production.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about the OneStar Revolution and what you pulled out of those techniques?
Well, ironically, in the beginning, it was I didn't understand the ecology as in as much depth, but I pulled out the living mulches, having clover growing with the crops, or some kind of legume growing with the crop, and that was what I tried to make happen in my early organic vegetable production in the 1990s, early 1990s. So yes, I must admit, when I came back to Montana and finally had my own farm, I was not using Fukuoka's techniques as with as much ecological focus as he had. I've come to that now maybe the last 20 years, but in the beginning, I did an annual living mulch, and I would every spring till up the whole field and put out a lot of compost, and then I would remake the beds and reseed the living mulch in between the crop rows. When that was very successful and I got braver, I went to a new field and I put out a cover crop of red clover and triticale. And gosh, it came up about 99% red clover and just was about as beautiful as you've ever seen. And that really gave me courage. So that's when we went to this strip till system, leaving a perennial living mulch in the walkways, and then only tilling the vegetable crop beds. Excuse me, and and again that took some. It was a learning curve to figure out how to not allow something as assertive as red clover to move into the beds every year, and hence learning two really important things: how to manage carbon to nitrogen ratios of my living walkways or my living mulch, and that maybe I wanted different levels of carbon to nitrogen residue added throughout the year, so that I want some lower carbon to nitrogen ratio residues and higher carbon to nitrogen ratio residues. But the timing was really key in relation to giving my crops the advantage, particularly when they were young seedlings or young transplants. So began quite.
When you talk
You
about
go ahead.
the timing and you don't want red clover to take over, are you mowing it before it goes to seed or?
Uh, yes. So I developed a system of selective mowing and selective tillage, and then what I'm calling rotational tillage, so that part of my crop rotation was more tillage, less tillage, and maybe in some cases with some crops and some successions, no tillage as part of it. But definitely mowing to maintain weeds mainly that would come up through the red clover, keeping them from going to seed. And sometimes I would certainly let the red clover bloom and let some of the what we were calling weeds bloom, because I began to learn that this living mulch system that I had developed for nutrient cycling and to maintain a living root for the microbial community also multitasked as habitat right next to my crop for beneficial insects. And what I discovered is that creating habitat close to the crop meant my beneficial insects didn't have to commute to work. And so the biological control, or what I now call biological suppression, was much more effective than the system where I had tilled, replanted the annual living walkways, a clover living mulch, and then waited for that to grow. So selective mowing, so that some part of that habitat close to the crop would be providing pollen and nectar to my beneficial insects all year round. So I went from just wanting living roots to also wanting above ground habitat. And again, trying to balance things going to seed and becoming problematic. Still figuring that out,
Are
by the way.
Yeah. Are you when you're mowing, are you mulching it in the perennial rows, or are you blowing it into your garden beds?
Well, funny you should ask that, because that's something now, after doing this for 20 or 30 years, that I'm beginning to modify. So when I first started, I just left it mostly right in the row, in the living walkway. And then I began mowing it and blowing it to the crop row, and it was part of my nutrient cycling, so that I was adding residue regularly throughout the season rather than just all at once. It also then would suppress weeds as a mulch, mowing and blowing, and it provided habitat for ground dwelling predators like carabid beetles and spiders. So, of course, I went to the other extreme and I mowed and blew everything, and I didn't leave anything in the living mulch row. Now, of course, it still had all of that root biomass. But doing that for many years, I realized, oh, right, I'm taking all the nutrients from that area. And then when I wanted to rotate after 5 years from the beds that had been my permanent beds to put my beds into the permanent walkways, I still had good soil organic carbon and soil organic matter, but I learned that some of that had to go back to the bed, particularly the year before I was going to change it over and it was going to become my vegetable production bed. Did that make sense? It was kind of complex.
No, that makes tons of sense. That's exactly that was gonna be my follow up question is did you realize that maybe you're robbing the living rows at all with by spreading that?
You
Yeah,
would
so that makes tons of
You would
sense.
think I would have figured that out sooner, but yes, it took me many years. And then, duh, yes, it's great habitat, and
It's kind of like you bailed hay on that row for a long
exactly.
time.
I was baling hay for years and years and not putting anything back. Exactly.
Yeah. Um, so when you made the move to having these perennial systems in these rows, I think my next question was going to be how long was the rotation? I'm assuming you're coming back and turning those into annual vegetable production rows, which you kind of already answered. But what is the species? What is the mix that you're using for those 5 years in those living rows?
In the living rows, well, again, it's a complex question because it's evolved for me. So on my Montana farm, when we moved to the perennial system, it was red clover and triticale, although really it was virtually red clover. And then the old pasture seemed to move back in a little bit. I started to get, well, I got weeds, and I'll tell you what those were. But I got some of the rhizomatous grasses. I got smooth brome back, for example. And after about 5 years, this 100% clover had moved to 90% grasses. So in other words, there's this natural cycling that occurs that moves me away from my legumes towards grasses. And that's the time I've learned to move back and then do some tillage in that area that's been a perennial for 4 or 5 years, and bring that under cultivation for annual vegetables. So that was in Montana, and it seemed to be about 5 years. I would start to see the the legumes diminishing, and the grasses and weeds like dandelions and several perennial weeds. In my book, I have a long list of what actually would move in, and what was useful, particularly, or less useful for the beneficial insects. Then I married this brilliant man who had been an organic orchardist in California, and he said his farm was bigger and better, so I moved to his farm and and started dealing with a system where it was he had put down mainly clovers, but also some perennial grasses, um, and um, and those were New Zealand clover, arrow clover, um, meadow brome. Um, I'm forgetting the list of all of the grasses that were in his mix, but I could look it up. It's in my book if you want me to look it up. And basically, with perennial fruit trees, of course, that mix just uh, stayed in there for years and years and years. And again, we got the weeds for free. Weeds moved in. It tended to move from legumes. He had about a 5% legume mix in his initial uh, his initial mix was 5% legumes, and then things would move in. When we moved to Oregon, we had this 50, well, actually 70 acres of irrigated land that had been in pasture for about 50 years. And we just decided to go with what that was. So we didn't put out a mix. We strip tilled, and we had this hay that was had red clover, white clover, alfalfa, and orchard grass and smooth brome and bluegrass and many pasture grasses. And uh, as we started doing strip tillage, we managed to bring in some weeds, or excuse me, release weeds that had been buried in that orchard system. So that's kind of a long answer to your question. Did I answer it?
Yeah, you did. I do a similar type of thing in our garden. I'm by no means a good gardener. It's something I need to work on a lot. But what I have found in our pasture setting too is when we do a new seeding, and red clover usually is the dominant species that comes up in the first 2 years. It does seem like those places that were a little bit too heavy in red clover, that third year bring back a lot of weeds. It's like there's something. I don't know if it helps, if it does something in the soil where it looks beautiful for 2 years, and then like in our situation, for some reason we see a lot of thistles that will come up in those heavier red clover spots. So I'm just curious if you think that there's anything that red clover does to the soil that like I almost call like thistles their companion somehow. Like it seems like after the red clover subsides a little bit, I agree grasses seem to come in on year 4 or 5, but that year right after the red clover was heavy, I do have a weed problem.
That's really interesting. And I'd have to say, um, contrary to what I have seen and the research that I've read, red clover, at least when it's mowed and left on the surface or turned in as a cover crop, is one of the better annual weed suppressors. And I just realized I will stop there and say annual weed suppressors. Over time, I think that it growing legumes changes the nutrient dynamics such that the grasses then are released and compete better. I feel like I haven't noticed, Taylor, but now I'll have to look, that after red clover, it also creates an area for perennial weeds. But that's a really interesting uh, uh, something that you've seen that I find very astute. Um, I feel like the weeds that I have managed to bring into my system are from my tillage, or
Yeah.
um, or from the changes in the nutrient dynamics as particular things grow and I mow and leave things on the surface. Then you're right. I definitely get I haven't had thistles come in that way, but I've certainly had rhizomatous grasses come in that way.
Hey there. Did you attend our EcoAg conference this year in Madison, Wisconsin? Well, if you didn't, or if you did, we've got the recordings now available. Get on-demand access to every session with the EcoAg recordings. Learn directly from the pioneers of soil health, livestock integration, and profitable regenerative systems, all at your own pace. Speakers include Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, John Kemp, Joel Salatin, and a lot more. We also have additional products that include the full-day workshops done by Matt Powers, John Kemp, Nigel Palmer, Jordan Green, Mark Shepard, and Austin Unruh. These workshops are in depth and will help you dig deep on the presenters' topics. Grab your recordings now at conference.eco-ag.com/24 recordings or find the link in the notes. Because the best investment you can make is in your own knowledge. Now back to the show. Yeah, you probably don't leave it alone long enough to see the thistles. Obviously, in a pasture setting, some of these places are getting months and months of no type of impact.
I bet that's it. And of course, remember, I'm when I say I'm mowing selectively, I'm mowing all of it. Whereas the livestock, of course, are grazing selectively and leaving the thistles and perhaps eating out some of the other things, which doesn't happen with me. It all gets mowed.
Yeah, right. You had mentioned before we made this live that there are some mineral balancing principles that you and your husband were actually kind of at odds with. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yes. When I first moved to his farm and married my husband, he was a mineral balancer and had gone to classes with Kinsey and really was devoted. In fact, on his website had a whole paragraph explaining how he did his mineral balancing. And of course, gave me a hard time because I'd only done testing of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium and absolute levels of calcium and magnesium. I understood Albrecht and I had looked at calcium magnesium ratios and I'd certainly looked at cation balance, but I hadn't even measured micronutrients. And he was just absolutely appalled. So we had a few arguments about that, and I must admit, he won me over, particularly with fruit production. We did a lot of on-farm experiments on the orchard in California that he had started, and one of them was that we took our O. Henry peaches and we went to our San Francisco farmers market with them, and we found O. Henry peaches at that market from other long-term organic producers who'd been organic farmers for 20 or more years. And then we got 6 fruits from our farm and 6 from several others, and we sent them off for nutrient analysis. And sure enough, the mineral balanced peaches from our farm had higher manganese, boron, and zinc than the other ones. And I said, okay, you win. And then when we moved to Oregon, we had very high calcium magnesium ratios, about 80% calcium. And there were some crops that did so much better than I had ever seen. I've never grown such healthy and prolific spinach, for example. So I began to defer to Carl's mineral balancing and have maybe not become quite as much of a mineral balancer as he was, but it's part of my calculations now.
Yeah, that's a that's a great story. That system usually does win out in the end, the balancing of the minerals and paying attention to that. Did you notice it helping a lot with pest control?
Well, that's another complicated question. I'm sorry, I'm sounding like an ecologist. We always say it depends, or on this hand and on the other hand. But As an old lady, I think that's unfortunately how I see things. So let me answer that by saying that I measured pest management and pest suppression pretty strongly on my farm in Montana. Entomology is kind of one of my areas. So designed experiments and looked at how the living mulch system was helping to suppress insects. And over time, I was able to stop all spraying on the farm in California, on the farm in Montana, even without paying too much attention to mineral balancing. On Carl's farm in California, when we got together, he had the courage, because I was out measuring a couple times a week, to stop spraying even on orchard fruit, which was a really big deal. People didn't not spray organic apples and organic peaches. They use certified organic materials. So we were able to do that. So in a very difficult place with lots of pest pressure. So I think that that probably was a combination of creating all the habitat that we did and for the beneficial insects and the mineral balancing, and particularly relying less on high nitrogen levels. We really
Yeah,
moved more towards a carbon base and a high nitrogen based soil fertility system.
that's interesting. Do you want to talk about the orchard and kind of give an overview of your orchard systems that you've worked on in the past, and then what you're working on now?
Yes, and ironically, I haven't. We made a few changes from what Carl had done on his California orchard when we moved to Oregon, but now I'm doing pretty similar things on the new orchard here in Montana. My vegetable production is changing quite a bit, but the orchard system seems to be working, and that is Carl did to start new orchard blocks or rows in California. He would do tillage. We are now doing mulching a year in advance. And so, for example, for a new orchard, we would take, about a half a bale of hay, so about 50 pounds of hay, put it onto the area where the fruit tree is going to be, and mow and blow in the living mulch into the whole row where it's going to be. And of course, looking at our soil test, and underneath that 50 pounds of hay goes the minerals. So we look and see what minerals are lacking and what needs to be balanced, and then we put that down only where the tree's going to go and with the hay. And then the next year, so we do that in August, and then March, the next spring, we pull that hay, and it's just this beautiful soil, a nice bare spot full of earthworms. And then we plant the soil there and remulch. So that's how we did the orchard in Oregon with just remarkable success. And I did that here in California, or excuse me, here in Montana 2 years ago. This will be the second year for the orchard trees. And I had one thing I had to change. I couldn't mulch as heavily because I've moved to a property surrounded by alfalfa fields, and I have 5 acres of alfalfa. And I have never seen so many voles in my life. So I, I had to keep it more mowed and more golf course like, and diminish the habitat for voles. So I was able to do the prep, but now the trees can't be mulched as heavily until they get larger. Maybe this year I'll start mulching them heavily as we've done, because a new issue, pests of rodents, has made me unable to do that as well.
When I'm gonna go back to the beginning part of this mulch, are you just rolling the bale out, making sure that it rolls out in a thick way,
Yes.
or are you using some sort of a tool that mulches it up and blows it on a certain area?
So the way that we did it in California, or excuse me, in Oregon, is that we had a crop chopper. So we would go to another field, crop chop it, uh, throw it into a trailer, and then we'd bring the trailer and just put it loose, about 50 pounds, and it looked like a little pyramid or a little volcano of hay.
Got it. And then how would you remove it?
We would just when we planted by hand, so we would just rake it aside, plant the tree, and then rake it back, or just pat it back with your hands. But of course, a lot of it had decomposed by the following spring.
Yeah, so that the mulch you're talking about once you put the trees in the ground is the same mulch that you originally put on.
Yes, but of course, we would
Yeah.
continue with the mowing and blowing selectively the living walkways in between, and that would continue to build up.
Right. What is your suspicion or thought on why the voles? Are you thinking that the mulch attracts the voles to that area, or are you thinking because of the alfalfa you have a lot of voles?
I'm not sure why we have so many voles here in Montana, but we certainly, in all of our other orchard, we know that voles like the taller grass. They like the mulch. That's part of their habitat. So even in Oregon, while we would mow and blow towards the trees springtime through summer into early fall, about the time that the leaves would fall from the trees and it was time to do the last mowing of the year to recycle all the nutrients back into the soil, we would mow it like a golf course. And we would mow and blow away from the trees so that there wasn't a lot of residue buildup right around the trunks where the voles would be. And in Oregon, we were lucky because we had a great irrigation system. We were on a slight hill, and it went down towards the river so that we could, and we had gated pipe irrigation. So after I did the last mowing, I would flood the orchard and not mow right next to the river. So I gave the voles a place to move that was much nicer. It wasn't flooded and it had nice tall grass away from the orchard. Here, I don't. I have flatter ground. I can't really do that, and and I've I can't manage my neighbors' properties, so I can't do anything about the way that they mow or don't mow.
Yeah. What I guess how many different species are you focusing on? One species in the orchard, or are you focusing on multiple different types of plants in the
I would
orchard?
certainly go for multiple, and I am. I had alfalfa grass, a lovely stand of alfalfa grass hay when I moved in, and I thought, oh, how exciting. And then I realized, oh my goodness, it's a monoculture of bloom. It doesn't give me the sequential blooming sequence that I got with my multi-species living mulch in Oregon and that I had finally developed in Montana and we had in California. So I'm going through and seeding as close to the fruit trees as possible, many different species, mainly legumes at this point. Um, but I'm encouraging weedy species, particularly the spreading winter annuals like speedwell, a veronica species, or I'm not discouraging dandelions, for example. We had chicory that came in the hay fields in Oregon. Let those bloom. So yes, trying. I have seeded things like Coreopsis tintoria, Helianthus annual sunflower. Um, I would love to get white yarrow established, but in the permanent alfalfa grass, I haven't had as much success with that. So so I'm encouraging, without putting down an absolute mix, because I don't want to disturb the ground. And I'm hoping by the
Yeah.
time they fruit that I'm going to have much more diversity out there.
Yeah. So what does the business of your farm look like? You have the vegetable production and you have the fruit trees. Where are you selling them? How are you selling them? What does that look like?
At this point, I am in semi-retirement. So the fruit, there's so
Congratulations.
well, um, I finally kind of had to get to that point. And the other thing was that when we farm together, how can I put it? Farmers don't usually tell you that they did well, but we did well. And so financially, I don't need to farm anymore. So I'm doing about a quarter acre of vegetables for myself, my friends, my family, and you'll laugh, but I need to do enough that I can continue experiments. And the orchard, semi-retirement, is down to about 110 trees now. So, so the orchard I have designed in a way that I have enough replication of varieties that I have mainly the larger blocks are apples and sweet cherries, and I have 5 trees of each of the varieties so that I have enough replications that I can do some of the nutritional and soil fertility, soil health management experiments I'm really excited about now. So obviously with 110 trees, I'm going to have to sell fruit, but I've got another year or two to figure that out. Um, and vegetables, when I have extra, I am donating it.
Yeah. Well, I love to hear that you're able to say that you had really good financial success, and that was from farming. I'm assuming when you guys were in California. Do you want to talk about a little bit of what that looked like? Where you think you had the success, and what folks can try to do today to replicate? Hey, eco farmers, this is Taylor Henry with Acres U.S.A. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoy interviewing these folks. If you're serious about regenerative agriculture, I've got an incredible resource you need to check out, the Acres U.S.A. membership. You farm in the physical world, and you deserve a physical printed magazine to match. Since 1971, Acres U.S.A. magazine has been the leading voice in ecological agriculture, delivering the best insights from regenerative farmers, agronomists, and researchers to help you farm profitably without toxic chemicals. Our membership included physical and digital copies of the magazine each month of the year, which has always been a standard for Acres U.S.A., but we wanted to over-deliver on content. When I acquired this business, I was happy to find that we had years of audio files from presentations at our annual EcoAg conference. And guess what? They were hiding. Well, not anymore. We developed this membership portal that gives you access to the recordings from farmers like Gabe Brown, Gary Zimmer, Joel Salatin, and Mark Shepard. We also include recordings of private events. Finally, if you are like me and you like listening to content, we are now producing a membership-only podcast of each issue of the magazine, so you can consume each article while you're out in the field. To make things even sweeter, you'll get discounts on books, workshops, and events to keep expanding your knowledge. So are you ready to take your farming to the next level? Join today for a ridiculously low price at eco-farming.com or see details in the notes. Okay,
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to just start from the beginning. Carl had 26 acres and about 8 acres of it in actual fruit production. So he had small 1 to 2 acre fields that were separated by native habitat. And in this case, it was oak pine forest. So instead of having big fields and taking out all the forest when he started this orchard, which was on quite a slope, because that's what he could afford when he was 20 years old. he left areas for habitat. Anyway, so we had 1 to 2 acre fields. We had 8 of those fields, or 7, excuse me, 7 of those fields, and we had a mixture of varieties within each field. So the same varieties in field 7 at the top of the hill would be in the field at the bottom of the hill. So we had different depending on what the weather conditions did, we were always going to have a crop somewhere. But it also was really important for disease suppression, so that instead of having a whole field of O. Henrys, which would have made picking much easier, but was not good, for example, for different varieties that were more or less susceptible to peach leaf curl, or some that were more or less susceptible to brown rot. So we would have no more than 10 to 20 trees of each variety in a particular row at any one time, so that we would have different varieties of peaches. Then we also had pears and apples and plums and pluots and nectarines, all mixed for diversity within these smaller fields. Then we did the living mulch system, and we discovered, working together, that our mowing timing was vital to our pest suppression or pest management. So in the spring, when we had our major pests, thrips, for example, that would injure the skin of the peaches and the nectarines, and oriental fruit moth, we wouldn't mow much at all. We would leave, particularly under the tree, very tall. We had to weed whack around the micro sprinklers to keep them irrigating, but we left things very tall, and we would mow alternate middles of the orchard for frost protection, so that our wind machines would be more effective. So all of these things to think about. And then as the season went on, we would selectively mow more until, for example, in apple and pears, later in the season, when we worried about codling moth, and then we would also have wilder habitat close to the trees to encourage predators of codling moth. So that's the living mulch. And then I told you we had the micro sprinklers, which was a wonderful way of irrigating. And then, as I said, we had an integrated pest management system. One of my jobs was to scout all the orchards at least once a week, and preferably twice a week, and keep records of what pests, what beneficials, what diseases and insects we were seeing. And we based when I first moved there, we based our organic spray system on my scouting. And as we had better timing with our mowing and noticed less pests actually in the trees, we were able to diminish and then finally stop spraying insecticides, organic insecticides. We had been using Entrust mainly at that point. And then one of the most exciting things is that we moved away from spraying sulfur, and Carl had already given up copper on the orchard for disease, because, you're going to love this, Carl came up with what he called his mineral mix bloom spray. So the idea was to build up the trees when they were just starting to blossom with micronutrients and nutrient balance, and to suppress our main disease organism, which was brown rot. So he did lots of experiments, and I talk about all of the things he tested in the book, and eventually came up with this mix of calcium, gypsum and potassium, micronutrients, seaweed, azomite, and Nutrimin. And the azomite and the Nutrimin, Carl believed, would coat the peach blossom and make it less susceptible to sporulation by the brown rot fungus. And then things like boron would help to set the blossom, and the micronutrient balance, I don't need to tell you what that was doing, just helping the tree develop the most effective immune system that it could. So basically, I'll just summarize. We designed the orchard for diversity, both in row and in field. We disturbed the soil as little as possible. We had a living mulch system with lots and lots of perennial and annual plant diversity. We did selective mowing so that we left it to bloom, or as much, at least 30 to 50% blooming at any one time, to provide habitat for both below ground and ground dwelling and above ground pollen and nectar requiring beneficial insects. And then we did this micro, almost homeopathic nutrient management approach with the mineral mix bloom sprays. And we did, 1 to 4 per season, depending on the conditions. I know that's kind of a
That's
mouthful,
it.
but you asked.
I did. That was amazing. Um, now that we look forward or look towards like today's age, what can people get out of your book right now that will help them in their current operations? What was kind of your idea about the book, and what are you hoping people get from it?
Well, I wanted to take people along our journey of moving from an organic approach to a more ecological approach, where we tried to minimize inputs and maximize crop health and nutrition. And I wanted to show it in a step by step process that was an evolution, so that people realized that we didn't come to this full blown minimal input system all at once, that it took us a while to get there, number one. And number two, that there were different environmental and climate, soil conditions on the different farms that we worked on that required just a little bit of tweaking, and that there wasn't a recipe. We have 10 of the ecological principles that we like to follow. We call them our ecological principles for managing relationships rather than just crops. But there's no recipe. It's going to look different in on any farm, depending on your sales. By the way, when you ask me about sales, 90% of my sales and our sales in California, the sales in Oregon, were direct marketing. So we always did farmers markets. That is part of our financial success, and one of the reasons we could get away with some of the things that we did, I think. So depending on all of your marketing, climate, soil, environmental conditions, an ecological farm is going to look different. And then at the end of the book, because I know that not everybody is going to want to give up pest management, I go through many different vegetable pests, many different fruit pests, and then how to suppress them, starting with what I give 3 phases: the least ecological impact, the moderate, and the most, so that there are things that are work and effective, but you also can think about what the ecological impact is and choose. And then I just am going to say that I'm still learning. I talked to John Kemp just the other day, and he said, "How's your new book coming?" And I said, "It's not. I only have one book in me." And he said, "Aren't you learning new things and doing new things?" And I said, "Well, yes, I am, every month." And I think that that's vital for us to remember, that if we have a system that's static, that we do the same exact thing every year, we might want to look at whether we're paying attention to the ecological relationships on our farm.
Yeah, that's amazing. What you said an interesting thing there that this is pretty impressive that you've gone to 3 different locations and you've been able to start up a business at local farmers markets in each location. Do you want to quickly just touch on, some of the things that you would tell folks that are getting started? What led to a lot of your success in starting these different
Yeah,
ventures?
yeah. It's hard to remember when I started in Montana. Um, Having abundance and beauty. One thing I learned when I was farming in New Jersey with a great vegetable farmer, he said, take the time to have the best crop you can, no matter what the conditions are, because it's always going to matter when you're at farmers market to have these beautiful crops. So that has always been part of our hit our success. And then back to the mineral balancing, we had a history we went to 7 Bay Area farmers markets in California per week, which was grueling, but financially lucrative. And again, a big display of gorgeous fruit and high colored. So we had a history, or we had a reputation for having highly colored fruit and really good tasting fruit. And so over the years, of course, it just became a love fest at farmers market. And I think there's compelling evidence now to support what Carl and I believe, that moving away from high nitrogen fertilization to a more balanced nutrients and micronutrients increase the color of our fruit. I just read a fascinating study where they were looking at high fruit tissue nitrogen in peaches, um, decreased vitamin C content. So the lower nitrogen peach tissue had higher vitamin C content and was also less susceptible to brown rot disease. So we think that the way we did our soil fertility made our fruit prettier at farmers market. Carl would tell you that all the mineral balancing and the micronutrients in our fruit made it taste better. I think it might be some of those antioxidants, by the way, that were in the darkly colored fruit. But there you go. Um,
That's a win-win. You get it looks nicer and it
and
tastes
it may
better.
be healthier for us. Um,
Well, certainly if it has better vitamin C and the
exactly, an
different nutrients in it.
antioxidant. So I think that's what I'm going to say. I do need to. When we sold the farm in California, we worked with the farmers for a year in partnership so that they could maintain our 7 farmers markets. So I want to say that in some ways it's harder for young farmers now. When we were younger, both Carl and I, it was easier to get into some of these really wonderful and exclusive farmers markets, and now it's getting harder. Um, so yes, we were in really good markets. In
Yeah.
Oregon, that was brand new, and same thing, big display, good colored fruit. Oh, giving samples. Always give samples, especially if you know you've got a great tasting product.
There's also, folks now have other opportunities that, you guys didn't have either, right? With technology, social media. A big thing people are doing, which you probably would have thought about doing, is the you pick type, where people come out to your farm and actually pick the fruit and the vegetables. So yes, there's definitely disadvantages, but I think we have a lot of advantages for us too.
As an old lady, I might get to that, with all of the sweet cherries I have. And I'm on kind of a very nice road. The end of the orchard is right on a road where people pass by. There's the possibility of pick your own for me in my future.
Yeah. Well, make sure you read one of our books, the Pick Your Own Farmer.
I will do that. Thank
Megan
you.
Newbar. Yeah, she talks about it a lot in there. So, is there anything else you'd like to mention, Helen, that we didn't touch on?
Gosh, I think I've talked so much. I should let you get a word in edgewise. Anything that I haven't said that you think I should say or talk about?
Well, we're excited to have Helen at our 50th annual EcoAg conference this year in December. So Helen will be there speaking. And other than that, let's just check out her book. And is there anything other? Do you want people to? Is there a way for people to contact you, reach out to you? Are you doing any consulting or anything like that?
I've been helping people because so many people have helped me. So I don't really do consulting, but I do answer questions if people want me to. If it gets to be too much, I may have to say, but so far I've been able to pull it off. Let's see. We do have a place where there's some videos about the farm in California, mainly. We did videos together at a YouTube site called Agrarian Dreams. There's a lot of videos that Carl and I did together. I think that's probably it. There was one other thing I was going to mention, and now I can't think of what it was. Oh, well. I guess I'm just really excited to meet all the Acres people in December.
Yeah, Neil Kinsey will be there too, so that'll
Oh,
be
my goodness.
Good for you to meet him.
I will go up and say I married a Kinseyan.
Yeah, he'll appreciate that. All right, Helen. Well, it was great speaking with you, and good luck to everything you're doing with your new farm, and we'll love to catch up in December.
Thanks very much. I really enjoyed it. You had great questions that made me think.
Well, that's good for someone that's very novice like me when it comes to this stuff, so I appreciate that. Thank you for listening to the Acres U.S.A. podcast, a podcast production of Acres U.S.A. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres U.S.A. is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. We're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about